never be the same.
Do you remember those weird TV spin-offs? The ones so strange you forgot they ever existed? These offbeat experiments aired when networks were willing to try anything, no matter how bizarre. But maybe the real surprise is how close some of them came to actually working. You almost feel bad for how forgotten this one is, almost. When Happy Days was still coasting off its golden age cool, this spin-off tried to do something different. Or maybe it tried to do too much. Joni Cunningham and Chachi Arcola were sweethearts, sure. They had chemistry. They had charm. They had at least a dozen montages between them. But what they did not have was a reason to headline their own show, especially one that turned into a soft-glow musical sitcom set in a fake version of 1950s Chicago. The pitch? Joni and Chachi moved to the city to start a band. That's it. They live with Chachi's mom and uncle, play local gigs, and occasionally squint into the middle distance about their relationship. Every third scene leads into a song, and not good songs either. The kind of stuff that sounds like it came from a school assembly where nobody practiced. They performed original tracks like You Look at Me and What Do You Do, which were clearly meant to launch Scott Baio as a teenage heartthrob with pop star potential. It did not work. Even the laugh track seemed confused. The show aired after Happy Days, an inherited prime slot, and still bled viewers like a leaky faucet. Part of the problem was the tone. Joni Loves Chachi wanted to be a love story, a musical, and a throwback sitcom all at once, but it never committed to any of them. It was too sweet to be funny, too shallow to be romantic, and too tone-deaf to sing its way out of trouble. And then there was the myth, the now debunked story that the show was a huge hit in Korea because Chachi apparently sounded like a vulgar word in Korean. Total nonsense. But the fact that the rumor stuck longer than the show itself tells you everything you need to know. People remembered the joke, not the series. The original characters worked because they were supporting roles. Joni's big moments on Happy Days felt earned. Chachi was best in small doses, mostly when being roasted by Fonzie. Stretching that into a weekly showcase made everything feel thinner, flatter, and somehow louder. And here's the wildest part. It could have worked. In a different format, maybe as a short miniseries or a musical special. But dragging it into a multi-season sitcom spotlight made every note feel off. It was not just forgotten, it felt like something audiences wanted to forget in real time. The show lasted only 2 short seasons, then Joni and Chachi got folded right back into the Happy Days universe like nothing happened. No fanfare, no major goodbye, just a shrug and a return to the status quo. The spin-off tried to give these two characters a happy ending of their own. Instead, it taught future showrunners a painful truth. Just because a couple is lovable in the background does not mean they can carry the whole stage. But hey, at least it gave us something to awkwardly hum about during trivia night. If you ever wondered what would happen if Baywatch went full X-Files, wonder no more. Baywatch Nights was exactly that, and somehow even stranger than it sounds. The original Baywatch was all about lifeguards, beach rescues, slow-mo runs, and David Hasselhoff doing Hoff-like things. And it worked. People bought in. It was sun, surf, and skimpy red swimsuits, pure escapism. So naturally, when it came time for a spin-off, they decided to take that sunny beach energy and shove it straight into a gritty private detective show. Yes, really. In Season 1, Mitch Buchanan, still played by David Hasselhoff, trades in his lifeguard whistle for a trench coat and becomes a part-time private investigator. He opens a detective agency with his buddy Garner, and together they solve crimes by the pier. That alone would have been weird enough. But in Season 2, they crank the weirdness up to 11. The cases turned paranormal. Ghosts, vampires, time travel. Baywatch became Buffy in a Speedo. Suddenly, every episode had Mitch wrestling some kind of ancient curse or supernatural entity, and somehow keeping his hair perfect through it all. The tone shift was jarring. One week, you are solving a jewel heist. The next week, you are exorcising a demon in a sunlit office with no explanation. The audience did not know what to do with it. The original Baywatch was already a guilty pleasure, campy, ridiculous, and proudly so. But Baywatch Nights did not feel campy in a fun way. It felt like someone misread the script, shot it anyway, and hoped no one would notice. The monsters were laughable. The acting got even stiffer. And the Hoff, bless him, tried to anchor it all with gravitas. But you can only say, there's something ancient here so many times before people start laughing. And yet, it is kind of legendary now, for how hard it tried to reinvent itself. That second season is so committed to the bit, it borders on heroic. It wanted to be spooky. It wanted to be smart. But it ended up being the TV version of, wait, what? The show only lasted 2 seasons before being quietly canceled and buried like one of its own monsters of the week. Hasselhoff went back to lifeguard duty full-time. No one really talks about Baywatch Nights, except as a trivia punchline or a cult oddity. But in a weird way, it deserves some credit. It swung big, it embraced the bizarre, and it gave us the kind of, wait, did that really air show that only the 1990s could dream up, with sincerity, chest hair, and a whole lot of fog machines. And hey, if you ever want to watch David Hasselhoff interrogate a vampire with zero irony, this one is for you. If you ever wondered what happened after Happily Ever After, the Brady Brides tried to answer that and made everything a little more awkward in the process. It begins with Marcia and Jan getting married on the same day. Yes, in typical Brady fashion, they planned a joint wedding, because of course they did. Their husbands, Wally and Philip, are total opposites. One a laid-back blue-collar guy, the other a straight-laced, uptight lawyer. That alone sets up the series' entire premise. Throw them all in a house together and let the laugh track do the work. So basically, it is a mashup of the Brady Bunch and The Odd Couple, with double the couples and none of the kids. The show leans hard into newlywed chaos, except it never really figures out how to make it fun. It feels like a sitcom built out of nostalgia scraps, everyone's smiling but no one knows why. The sisters fight, the husbands clash, and you can almost hear the ghost of Sunshine Day weeping in the background. The weirdest part? It is not even that bad. It is just deeply strange. For one, it aired as a TV movie first, and when that did okay-ish, NBC stretched it into a full series. But without the original Brady Bunch dynamic, the kids, the dog, the moral of the episode vibes, it felt like a reunion party that lasted too long. The studio audience seemed confused about when to laugh. The show tried to act modern, but every plotline still felt trapped in the 70s. There were no big hijinks, no singing, just 4 adults trying to share a house and figure out how to be married, while also keeping up the squeaky clean Brady image, which is hard when your show is sandwiched between raunchier, smarter sitcoms that knew what decade they were in. And then there is the fashion, the hair, the collars, the earth tones. It is like the early 1980s got stuck in a Brady time loop. Everyone's smiling too hard. The canned music plays just a little too long. You start to feel like the set itself is slowly closing in. And somehow, that is part of the charm. The show only lasted 10 episodes before quietly bowing out, though you can still find clips floating around that feel like lost time capsules. What makes the Brady Brides so odd is that it never fully commits to being its own show. It just lives in the shadow of the original, afraid to change, but too dated to stand still. It is like trying to relive high school at your office job. Still, you have to give it points for effort. It gave us grown-up Marcia and Jan, even if they felt like teenagers in business casual. It is not classic Brady. It is not modern sitcom. It is something. And maybe that is enough to earn it a weird little spot in the Brady family tree. Besides, who among us has not tried to make the past work long after the music stopped playing? Imagine being the follow-up act to MASH, one of the most beloved, most watched, most critically acclaimed series in television history. Now imagine trying to do that without Hawkeye, without Radar, without Klinger in a dress, just a hospital in Missouri and the faint echo of greatness. That is AfterMASH. It picks up after the Korean War, following Colonel Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulcahy as they return to civilian life and work at a veterans hospital. And right there, you have the show's biggest gamble. Make a drama about healing that feels just as sharp as a show about war. It tried to stay funny. It tried to stay heartfelt, but it also tried to be MASH without MASH. And no matter how you dressed it up, it always felt like you were eating leftovers with none of the spice. Good intentions, solid cast, but something was missing. The tone was weird. Sometimes it leaned hard into hospital comedy, with Klinger getting into shenanigans or struggling to adjust to normal life. Other times, it pushed into very serious drama, tackling PTSD, broken families, and veterans lost in the cracks of the system. And while those themes were real and important, the execution often felt like whiplash. One episode had a heartfelt scene about suicide, followed by a gag about stolen laundry. It was like emotional turbulence every week. And here is the thing, AfterMASH was not a total disaster. The ratings were actually strong at first. People wanted it to work. But as the weeks went on, the novelty wore off, and the heart of the original, its humor, its soul, its chaos, just was not there. Even the characters felt like they were just waiting. Potter was still dignified. Klinger was still loud. Mulcahy still moral. But without the camp, without the backdrop of war, their struggles felt smaller, and so did the laughs. There is nothing wrong with telling quieter stories, but the show never really found a voice loud enough to be heard. Season 2 brought in new cast members, shuffled the setting, and tried to reboot the energy. It did not work. CBS pulled the plug mid-season. The final episodes were never even aired in many cities. And so, AfterMASH became the textbook definition of a spin-off that forgot what made the original great. Still, it is not fair to call it terrible. It just never stood a chance. Following MASH with AfterMASH is like following the Beatles with elevator music. It might sound nice, but you are going to miss the noise. So, was it a mistake? Probably. Was it brave? Absolutely. And that, if nothing else, makes it unforgettable in a very weird, very AfterMASH kind of way. If you blinked in early 1987, you probably missed the Tortellis. And honestly, NBC was hoping you would forget it even faster. This was the first official spin-off of Cheers, which, for context, was already one of the smartest, tightest, most character-driven sitcoms on television. So when they announced a new series centered around Nick Tortelli, Carla's sleazy ex-husband, the reaction was basically, wait, him? Nick, played by Dan Hedaya, was a charming lowlife with a great mustache and exactly zero self-awareness. On Cheers, he worked in small bursts, popping in to stir up chaos, insult Carla, and leave. That was the formula. That was the limit. But the Tortellis decided to build a whole show around him. And not just him. His new wife Loretta, played by Jean Kassem, who was all hair and helium and optimism. The idea was to follow Nick and Loretta as they moved to Las Vegas to reconnect with Nick's estranged son and open an appliance repair business. Yes, you read that correctly. Appliance repair. That is what NBC handed viewers after Cheers' witty bar banter and layered characters. The only thing this show repaired was your faith in returning to the original. The pilot tried to blend slapstick, family dysfunction, and oddball characters, but it never settled into a tone. It was never heartfelt, never dark enough to be edgy, never sharp enough to be funny. The jokes bounced between cartoonish and cringe, and the pacing felt like someone had left the laugh track on shuffle. Even when Cheers' characters showed up to give it a boost, they felt like they were just passing through, like even they knew they were on the wrong set. Nick worked in small doses because he was always a disruption. He brought chaos to Carla's world. But when the Tortellis put him at the center, it became clear that he had nowhere to go. He was not changing. He was not learning. He was just louder. Loretta, to her credit, had an innocent sweetness, but her voice was pitched so high it felt like the audio was corrupted. And then there was the weird energy, like everyone was trapped in a sitcom version of Purgatory. The house was ugly. The pacing was off. It felt like every scene had already been done better on a different show. It wanted to be a working-class comedy, a family show, and a Cheers spin-off all at once. Instead, it was none of those things. The Tortellis aired just 13 episodes before it was yanked off the air. It never found an audience. Critics were baffled. Fans of Cheers were confused. and even the network seemed eager to pretend it never happened. But what makes it weird is not just that it failed, it is that it was ever greenlit at all. It is like ordering a fine steak and being handed a microwave burrito with a smile. It reminds us that spin-offs do not work just because the parent show was great. The character has to be right, the timing has to be right, and sometimes, no matter how much you loved a recurring joke, it is not supposed to become the whole punchline. Nick went back to Cheers for a few more appearances. The show moved on. So did we. But the Tortellis? It lives on, quietly, in lists like this one, exactly where it belongs. Imagine a Sanford and Son episode without Sanford or his son. That is Sanford Arms in a nutshell. It aired in 1977, just a few months after Sanford and Son ended its wildly successful 6-season run. The original was smart, sharp, and built around the unforgettable energy between Red Fox's Fred Sanford and Demon Wilson's Lamont. But when both stars left the show, Fox for his own variety series, Wilson over a contract dispute, NBC decided not to let the brand go. So they created a spin-off and kept the house, and threw out everything else. The setup, the old Sanford home, has now been turned into a boarding house. That's right, the junkyard's gone, and in its place is an inn, complete with new owner Phil Wheeler. Phil, played by Theodore Wilson, is a nice enough guy, but he's no Fred Sanford. No attitude, no gravel in the voice, no zingers. He's just there, floating in the middle of a show that used to be filled with edge. The show tried to keep some of the side characters, Aunt Esther, Grady, Bubba, but without the core relationship between Fred and Lamont, it all fell flat. The charm, the rhythm, the bite, gone. What was left was a hollow version of a classic, rebranded with the same font and hoping you would not notice the difference. And that was the problem. Everything looked familiar, but nothing felt right. The set was the same, but the laughter was thinner. The warmth had vanished, replaced with sitcom filler and guest stars trying to carry scenes that used to write themselves. It was like visiting your childhood home after someone else moved in and changed all the furniture. You recognized the shape, but the soul was gone. But you noticed. Everybody noticed. It is like walking into your favorite restaurant, ordering your usual, and being handed a paper plate with nothing on it but nostalgia and disappointment. Sanford Arms did not know what it wanted to be. A sitcom? A reboot? A continuation? It was a strange mix of recycled jokes and new characters that never quite clicked. The theme song tried to echo the original, but even the music sounded like it had moved on. The audience laughed politely. The writing felt sanitized. You kept waiting for someone to yell, "You big dummy!" just to make it feel familiar again. But it never came. Just silence and canned laughter. NBC aired only 4 episodes before canceling it. 4 out of 8 that were produced. It vanished almost immediately, left off most rerun packages, and buried beneath Sanford and Son's lasting legacy. Even die-hard fans sometimes forget it existed. But Sanford Arms matters for one reason. It shows what happens when you keep the set but lose the soul. A brand name can only carry you so far. Once you remove the chemistry, the spark, the grit that made the original special, you are left with props and memories. And in this case, a front porch with nobody worth watching sitting on it. No Fred, no Lamont, no shot. Some spin-offs fail because they take big swings. Sanford Arms failed because it barely took a step. You remember Flo, everyone did. Big hair, big attitude, and one of the most quoted catchphrases of the 1970s. "Kiss my grits!" She lit up Alice, turning a supporting role into something electric. She stole scenes like a pro, walking into the diner and instantly making every line sound 10 times funnier than it had any right to be. So naturally, CBS gave her a spin-off. They called it Flo. Simple enough. But what started with promise quickly turned into something a little stranger than expected. The setup? Flo leaves the diner, buys a rundown roadhouse in her Texas hometown, and tries to run it while fending off small-town weirdos, family drama, and flaky staff. It was supposed to be her big breakout, kind of like Cheers meets Dallas with a touch of sass, but it mostly felt like Flo wandered into someone else's sitcom and never found the door out. The edge was gone. The grit? Still in the phrase, but not much else. The tone was inconsistent. One minute, it was about Flo rediscovering herself and building something real. The next minute, it was goofy jokes about plumbing or moonshine. The supporting cast never clicked the way the Alice crew did. They were fine, but nobody balanced Flo the way Mel or Alice had. Without that push and pull, the character floated. Big energy, but no anchor. To make things weirder, the show kept trying to inject drama into a world that thrived on snappy one-liners. Flo's mother showed up, her ex showed up. Everyone had some history to unpack, but it always felt like background noise to the real reason people watched, to hear her tell someone off with flair. But the magic faded fast when she was the one stuck listening instead of firing back. It is one thing to give a character their own show. It is another to give them a world that actually fits. Flo's world never made sense. She was meant to stir the pot, not own the kitchen. The jokes landed softer. The conflicts felt flatter. It was as if the writers kept asking, what would Flo do? But forgot to ask why she mattered in the first place. It is a classic case of a character working better in contrast than in command. Flo was meant to shake things up, not hold them together. She was lightning in a bottle on Alice, but once you made her the whole weather system, things got foggy. The Roadhouse setting felt tired, like a sitcom version of Purgatory with neon lights. And the jokes leaned heavily on stereotypes that felt dated even back then. The first season did okay in the ratings. People tuned in out of curiosity, loyalty, or the hope that it would eventually figure itself out. But the second season never really came. CBS moved it around the schedule like it was trying to lose it on purpose, and the show quietly disappeared after 29 episodes. Still, Flo herself, played by Polly Holliday, deserves credit. She gave the role everything. The accent, the swagger, the eye rolls, all delivered with perfect timing. It just turned out that what made her shine was bouncing off a room full of opposites. Without that, the spin-off sputtered. Sometimes lightning strikes once, and sometimes it takes more than a catchphrase to power a whole show. You could feel it coming. After 8 seasons of Three's Company, one of the most chaotic, flirty, innuendo-filled sitcoms of its time, John Ritter was ready for something new, or at least something next. Enter Three's a Crowd, the official continuation of Three's Company, but without Janet, without Terry, and definitely without the comedic friction that made the original such a hit. The premise flipped everything. Jack Tripper finally gets serious, opens a restaurant, settles down with a girlfriend named Vicky, and moves in above his business. Except she does not want to get married. Her father hates Jack, and the whole show becomes a weird hybrid of relationship sitcom and passive-aggressive family drama. It was not sexy anymore, not wild, not even really funny. It was like Three's Company woke up with a hangover, got dressed for brunch, and forgot why people loved it in the first place. The slapstick was toned down, the misunderstandings replaced with actual arguments, and Jack, who once juggled lies and lovers with perfect sitcom logic, was now trying to navigate a long-term relationship with compromise and responsibility. Yikes. Fans tuned in hoping for more of the same chaos. But what they got felt like Jack Tripper trapped in someone else's sitcom. Vicky, played by Mary Carteret, was fine, charming enough, but the chemistry never popped. And her father, the grumpy landlord type, felt like a cardboard copy of past antagonists. The energy was off. It was not the same Jack, but more importantly, it was not the same world. The roommates were gone, the misunderstandings were fewer, and the laughs came from quieter places that just did not hit as hard. Even the set looked subdued, as if someone dimmed the lights on purpose. The magic of Three's Company was its chaos. Here, it felt like everyone was trying not to spill their wine. It was sitcom sobriety, and it just felt wrong. More importantly, the absence of the trio killed the show's whole rhythm. Without Janet and Terry, or even Chrissy or Cindy, Jack had no one to bounce off of. The comic timing that came from living with 2 roommates? Gone. The double entendres, the mistaken identities, the kitchen collisions, they all stayed behind at the old apartment. In Three's a Crowd, the only real crowd was the awkward silence. ABC hoped the show would carry over the magic. Instead, it carried over the name, the lead actor, and not much else. Ratings started okay, but the fan base quickly drifted. By the end of its single-season run, Three's a Crowd had faded into sitcom trivia, known mostly as that one where Jack gets a girlfriend. There was ambition here, an attempt to evolve a character instead of trapping him in eternal bachelorhood. But that evolution came at the cost of everything that made him lovable. Jack Tripper's charm lived in his bad decisions and good heart, not in sensible life planning. The writers gave him a future, but it came at the expense of his past. And sitcoms, more than most genres, are built on rhythm. Break that, and you break the spell. John Ritter, to his credit, remained endlessly likable. But it turns out Jack Tripper growing up was the one thing no one asked for. The fans wanted innuendo. They wanted pratfalls. They wanted a show that knew what it was. But Three's a Crowd tried to evolve, and in doing so, it lost everything that made Three's Company fun. If you were an X-Files fan in the late 1990s, you knew the Lone Gunmen. They were Mulder and Scully's awkward backup, the conspiracy trio who lived in basements, wore trench coats indoors, and always had something to say about government satellites. They were lovable, ridiculous, and just paranoid enough to make you wonder if they were right. So in 2001, Fox gave them their own show, a full spin-off, their time to shine. And somehow it worked for exactly 13 episodes. The Lone Gunmen leaned hard into the trio's dynamic. Langley, the computer geek, Byers, the idealist in a suit, and Frohike, who dressed like a trenchcoat-wearing gremlin and had the confidence of a man twice his height. The show ditched the horror and brooding darkness of the X-Files in favor of full-on comedy thriller. Think Mission. Impossible meets Scooby-Doo with a tinfoil hat budget. Every episode was about some secret plot, some bizarre cover-up, some high-tech scheme, usually involving evil corporations, rogue agents, or a deadly toaster. Seriously. And it was weird. Not like the X-Files weird. This was Saturday morning cartoon weird. The tone was lighter, the pacing faster, and the world a little sillier. They added a new character, Jimmy Bond, yes really, who was kind of a lovable idiot, and Eve Zadell Harlow, a mysterious femme fatale whose name is literally an anagram for Lee Harvey Oswald. The show was self-aware, too self-aware, but that also gave it charm. The pilot episode became infamous years later, not for what it did right, but for what it accidentally predicted. The plot? A plane is hijacked remotely and nearly flown into the World Trade Center. This was 6 months before September 11th. It is chilling in hindsight. At the time, it just felt like another over-the-top, high-stakes tech plot. But post-2001, the show's cancellation started to feel even stranger. Was it the tone? The weird shift from conspiracy drama to gadget comedy? Or did the world just change too fast for it to keep up? Probably all of the above. The Lone Gunmen had always worked best in contrast. On The X-Files, they were the comic relief. They gave Mulder's seriousness a foil. They added levity, a little chaos, and a reminder that even in a show about aliens and black oil, sometimes the real threat was the fax machine. But in their own series, without Mulder or Scully to ground them, the gunmen just kind of spiraled. The jokes were louder, the stakes were goofier, and the audience did not follow. It was not bad, just off, like a side dish suddenly turned into a main course. The writing had potential. The cast had chemistry. But the concept felt stretched, like trying to build a fortress out of duct tape and ramen noodles. You admired the effort, even while waiting for the walls to fall. Fox canceled the series after one season. The characters returned briefly on The X-Files, only to be killed off in a storyline that still makes longtime fans groan. That was the end of the road, or the bunker. Still, The Lone Gunmen deserves a weird kind of credit. It tried something no one else would. It handed the keys to the nerdiest, least photogenic trio on television and said, "Go save the world." And for 13 episodes, they did, with hacked laptops, cheap trench coats, and exactly 0 cool points. It was weird. It was unexpected. And if you forgot it existed, that probably just means you weren't paying close enough attention, which is exactly what they would have warned you about. The 1960s were a golden age for spy shows. James Bond was everywhere, Get Smart made it funny, and the man from UNCLE was right in the sweet spot. Suave, stylish, and just a little surreal. So, of course, NBC tried to double the fun with The Girl from UNCLE, a spin-off that answered the question no one had asked. What if the espionage, but with more heels? The result was, let's just say, very 1966. The show starred Stephanie Powers as April Dancer, the first female agent of UNCLE to headline her own series. Her partner was Mark Slate, played by Noel Harrison, who mostly hovered at her side, offering dry British commentary and wearing a lot of turtlenecks. The premise was identical to The Man from UNCLE, fight the evil organization, THRUSH, save the world with gadgets, and make everything look incredibly cool while doing it. But where the original leaned into spy parody with a wink, The Girl from UNCLE turned the wink into a smirk, then into a full-on fashion runway. And that is where things got weird. The show became more about style than story. April Dancer changed outfits mid-mission, literally. Plot lines stopped for her to model jumpsuits. Her spy gear was designed like accessories. Lipstick lasers, hairbrush transmitters, you name it. It was espionage meets department store catalog. And somehow, that was not even the weirdest part. The show leaned hard into camp. Villains included evil toy makers, mad fashion designers, and hypnotists disguised as lounge singers. The tone zigzagged between light adventure and flat-out absurd. One episode involved a scheme to launch a rocket full of perfume. Another centered on an underground society of beatniks. You could never tell if it was supposed to be cool or just making fun of itself. Meanwhile, April Dancer, despite being introduced with so much promise, rarely got to lead her missions without backup. The scripts often sidelined her, giving the clever moments or takedowns to Mark Slate, which kind of defeated the point of having a girl from UNCLE in the first place. It was supposed to be progressive, but it played like a parody of progress. April looked the part. She had the gadgets, she had the charm, but she rarely had the agency. The ratings started decent but fell off quickly. Critics were split. Some praised its style, others mocked its fluff. By 1967, it was gone. One season, 29 episodes, then back into the vault of mid-century spy oddities. It was weird, not awful, not unwatchable, just weird. A glittering gadget-filled reminder that sometimes spinning off a hit show is more about timing and less about tailoring. Even in spycraft, not every mission goes as planned. In a decade packed with neon lights and high-tech dreams, somehow television also made room for a 1,000-year-old wizard fixing cars in San Francisco. That is Mr. Merlin. Yes, that Merlin. The legendary one with the pointy hat and the spells. Except now he goes by Max Merlin, wears a jumpsuit, and runs an auto shop. Because apparently even magical royalty needs to pay rent. The setup sounds like someone pulled names out of a hat. You take one part Arthurian legend, one part sitcom, toss in a teenage apprentice, and poof, you get 22 episodes of magical mayhem hidden behind a stack of carburetors. Max tries to live a quiet life, but things change fast when he meets Zach, a regular kid who pulls a crowbar out of a stone. Yes, really, and accidentally becomes his magical apprentice. From there, it is off to the enchanted races. The show walks this hilarious tightrope between ancient mysticism and early 80s goofiness. One minute they are fixing an engine, the next they are stopping time or summoning spells from a dusty old grimoire hidden under the shop counter. The spells almost always go wrong, of course. That is where the comedy lives. A love potion misfires. A van ends up teleporting. And Max? He just sighs and mutters something about the good old days in Camelot. But here is the part that makes Mr. Merlin more than just a joke stretched over a season. It had charm. Real, sincere charm. Max cared about Zach. He wanted to teach him responsibility, not just with magic, but with life. And Zach, despite being a goofball, really wanted to learn. Their chemistry was genuine, even if the show never quite figured out how to blend fantasy and sitcom without getting tangled in its own premise. Still, there was something wonderful about watching ancient magic squeezed into modern suburbia. It reminded people that wonder did not have to be flashy or loud. Sometimes it could show up in a dusty garage with a wizard holding a wrench. Mr. Merlin was weird, uneven, and full of heart. And that is exactly why it is too good to forget. Some shows are ahead of their time, so much so that the world forgets them before it ever really saw them. Get Real was one of those shows. It was a single-season drama-comedy hybrid that pulled back the curtain on suburban life with startling honesty and heartache. It followed the Green family, imperfect, struggling, and achingly familiar. Parents trying to hold on to their marriage. Teens trying to hold on to themselves. What made Get Real different was its courage to break the fourth wall. Characters would look straight into the camera and say the things we were too scared to admit, about fear, about love, about how hard it is just to be a person. Jesse Eisenberg played the awkward, sensitive son. Anne Hathaway, in one of her earliest roles, was the confident daughter cracking under quiet pressure. But it was not about star power. It was about emotional honesty. The show dared to be vulnerable at a time when television preferred gloss over grit. Every episode felt like opening a diary and reading what someone else was too afraid to say out loud. The kind that does not raise its voice to be heard. Each episode felt like a confession, a little too raw, a little too real. Maybe that is why it did not last. Viewers wanted resolution, but Get Real only offered reflection. And when it vanished, it left behind the kind of ache you feel when a good conversation ends too soon. Today, it is barely a footnote in TV history, but for those who watched, it was a whisper of truth in a world that usually just pretended. The Many Loves of Dobby Gillis was not your average teenage sitcom. It aired from 1959 to 1963 and had one of the most unique voices of its time. This was a show about a lovesick young man who talked directly to the camera, breaking the fourth wall long before it became a storytelling trend. Dobby was charming, hopelessly romantic, and always entangled in some absurd scheme to win over the girl of the week. But what made the show stand out even more was the presence of Maynard G. Krebs, played by Bob Denver, a beatnik sidekick who recoiled at the word work and became a cultural icon in his own right. The show was funny, sharp, and smarter than it often got credit for. It touched on real themes of class, ambition, and teenage rebellion, all wrapped in a light-hearted, lovable package. Dobby wasn't a rebel or a genius. He was something rarer, a sincere dreamer. He wanted love, he wanted meaning, and he wanted it without irony. It was the first time television said it was okay to be awkward, poetic, and hopeful at once. And it let teenagers be foolish without making them the punchline. It gave American youth a voice, an oddball voice maybe, but a voice nonetheless. Over time, though, it was overtaken by louder, brighter comedies and the rise of more dramatic fare. Dobby faded into the background, his monologues forgotten, his daydreams replaced by different kinds of heroes. But if you watched it, really watched it, you remember the warmth, the honesty, the way it made being young feel both ridiculous and profound. The Many Loves of Dobby Gillis was not your average teenage sitcom. It aired from 1959 to 1963 and had one of the most unique voices of its time. This was a show about a lovesick young man who talked directly to the camera, breaking the fourth wall long before it became a storytelling trend. Dobby was charming, hopelessly romantic, and always entangled in some absurd scheme to win over the girl of the week. But what made the show stand out even more was the presence of Maynard G. Krebs, played by Bob Denver, a beatnik sidekick who recoiled at the word work and became a cultural icon in his own right. The show was funny, sharp, and smarter than it often got credit for. It touched on real themes of class, ambition, and teenage rebellion, all wrapped in a light-hearted, lovable package. Dobby wasn't a rebel or a genius. He was something rarer, a sincere dreamer. He wanted love, he wanted meaning, and he wanted it without irony. It was the first time television said it was okay to be awkward, poetic, and hopeful at once. And it let teenagers be foolish without making them the punchline. It gave American youth a voice, an oddball voice maybe, but a voice nonetheless. Over time, though, it was overtaken by louder, brighter comedies and the rise of more dramatic fare. Dobby faded into the background, his monologues forgotten, his daydreams replaced by different kinds of heroes. But if you watched it, really watched it, you remember the warmth, the honesty, the way it made being young feel both ridiculous and profound. My Mother the Car is one of those sitcoms that even sounds made up when you say it out loud. The title tells you everything you need to know. A man discovers that his late mother has been reincarnated as a 1928 Porter automobile. Yes, a car that talks and nags and gives life advice through the radio. The moment you hear that, your brain kind of short-circuits. But in 1965, someone decided that was primetime material, and the result was one of the strangest sitcoms to ever hit the airwaves. And yes, it haunted rerun blocks all through the 1980s. The main character, Dave Crabtree, buys the car, and it immediately starts talking to him, in his mom's voice. She says she was reincarnated through transmigration of the soul, whatever that means, and is now here to guide him through life. And by guide, we mean completely micromanage every decision he makes, including his career, his parenting, and his love life. So you had a fully grown man being parented by a classic car with a personality. And not just any personality, the kind that honks if you ignore her advice. It was part sitcom, part metaphysical meltdown, and somehow still managed to feel like a family show. Watching it was like attending a therapy session inside a used car lot. The car had headlights that blinked, doors that swung open dramatically, and a dashboard that somehow expressed disappointment. And even though Dave tried to keep this supernatural secret from his friends and family, he was constantly caught talking to his vehicle, at red lights, in parking lots, in the driveway. Imagine being a neighbor and watching that happen. You would be dialing the local psychiatric hotline before your morning coffee even finished brewing. But the weirdness did not stop there. The car had opinions on everything, and she was never afraid to share them. She meddled in her son's job interviews. She gave unwanted advice during dates. She even guilt-tripped him into doing chores. And the kicker? The car's voice, a refined maternal tone, came through the radio like it was your local AM station of eternal judgment. It was the sitcom equivalent of a hallucination with a laugh track. But somehow, it worked just enough to become a cult classic. Not because it made sense. It did not. But because it was so unapologetically strange. And it stuck around in reruns well into the 1980s, where a whole new generation of kids got exposed to the sheer madness of a man arguing with his car in broad daylight. Watching My Mother the Car as a kid felt like finding a glitch in the television matrix. It made you question how stories even got made. Who sat in a meeting and said, "Let us take grief, reincarnation, vintage vehicles, and put it all in a 30-minute comedy block." And more importantly, why did it kind of work? It left kids with a weird but oddly heartwarming idea. Maybe your mom is always with you, even if she now runs on gasoline. My Mother the Car was not about logic. It was about loyalty, family, and the strange comfort of knowing someone has your back, even if they are in the garage. So imagine this. Suzanne Summers, yes, the fitness queen and sitcom darling, decides to come back to television. But this time, instead of playing the bubbly blonde next door, she is wearing a badge. And not just any badge. She is the sheriff of a small Nevada town, trying to keep law and order while raising her kids and dealing with deputies who do not quite take her seriously. Welcome to She's the Sheriff, one of the strangest casting curveballs of the 80s. The show starts off with Suzanne's character, Hildy Granger, inheriting her late husband's job as county sheriff. Instead of stepping aside or moving on, she steps up, and suddenly this suburban mom is running the department. And as you can guess, the rest of the show is mostly about how awkward and fish out of water that situation becomes. Her staff is made up of old-school officers who are baffled by the idea of a woman bossing them around. But every episode, Hildy proves she is up to the task. In high heels and shoulder pads, of course. Now, She's the Sheriff lives in the land of classic sitcom tropes, misunderstandings, slapstick, freeze-frame endings with theme music. It never quite knew if it wanted to be a workplace comedy or a family show, but what made it so odd was just how sincere it tried to be. It wanted you to laugh, sure, but it also wanted you to believe that this woman really could balance kids, deputies, and crime reports, all while staying cheerful and permed. Suzanne Summers gave it everything. Her delivery was sharp, her charm was dialed up to 11, and somehow she made you root for Hildy even when the jokes were a little flat. It was not groundbreaking, but it was trying, and you could feel it. It had that 80s optimism, the kind that made you believe anyone could do anything, even become the sheriff, if they just smiled hard enough and refused to quit. The show aired in syndication and not many people noticed it during its run. But years later, it still pops up in the strangest conversations about forgotten TV. Because She's the Sheriff was not just weird, it was weird on purpose. A sitcom experiment that ran on charm and curiosity. And that is exactly why it is too good to forget. Some shows did not just reflect youth, they shaped it. California Dreams was a sun-soaked surfside time capsule of teenage life in the early 1990s. It followed a group of high school friends who formed a band, chasing stardom while juggling friendship, heartbreak, homework, and everything in between. The setting was always golden, the skies always blue, but the emotions hit deep. Every episode felt like a page out of a diary someone forgot to lock. Behind the catchy guitar riffs and pop lyrics, this was a show about change, about how friendships bend under pressure, how dreams evolve, and how growing up always means leaving something behind. The characters, from Jake's cool loner persona to Tiffany's grounded kindness, were more than tropes. They were reflections of us. They made mistakes, chased the wrong people, fought over the wrong things, and then picked up the pieces, sometimes with a song, sometimes with silence. California Dreams offered a vision of youth that was both dreamy and devastating. It made you want to learn guitar. It made you want to call your friends. It made you wonder if high school was really just a stage for a story you might not fully appreciate until it is over. The show ended after 4 years, not with a bang, but a quiet fade. It was gone before most people realized how much it mattered. Now it lives as a soft echo from the corner of nostalgia, waiting for someone to remember how it felt to watch young people sing their hearts out while the tide rolled in behind them. Now, Jennifer Slept Here. That one was pure ghostly weirdness, and it hit you with it right out of the gate. A teenage boy moves into a fancy old house in Los Angeles with his parents, only to discover that it is haunted by the ghost of a dead 1950s movie star named Jennifer Farrell. She was bold, brassy, and glamorous. Think Marilyn Monroe with sass dialed up to 11. But only he could see her. Not his mom, not his dad, just him. So basically, imagine being a teenager and having a flirty ghost as your personal mentor/chaotic roommate. That is what we were working with. This show was an absurd blend of spooky and sitcom. Jennifer would pop in and out of scenes, float through walls, and offer life advice in between cracking jokes about Hollywood and haunting the houseplants. And again, only the boy could see her. So imagine what that looked like to everyone else. Talking to thin air, laughing by yourself, arguing with nobody in the living room. If you had that kid in your class, your first thought would not be ghost, it would be get him some help. But because it was the 1980s and television was allergic to subtlety, the show just rolled with it. There were full episodes about Jennifer helping him deal with bullies, crushes, and even homework. She would possess objects, rearrange furniture, and occasionally do impressions of celebrities she literally knew when she was alive. The jokes were fast, the energy was chaotic, and the ghost effects, well, let's just say they were charmingly low budget. Jennifer glowed sometimes, but mostly she just walked around like a regular person. A very sparkly, sassy person with feathered hair and lots of eyeshadow. What made it even weirder was how normal the show tried to make all this feel. The parents were completely unaware. There was no demonology, no dark undertones, no horror. Just, yeah, my house is haunted by a ghost with a killer wardrobe and she is helping me survive high school. Totally chill. The ghost was more helpful than most adults in the kid's life, and as strange as it sounds, the show had some genuinely sweet moments. Jennifer had unfinished business, and helping this awkward, neurotic teenager was her way of staying connected to the world she used to love. It was a short-lived show, only one season, but it left a permanent dent in the minds of 1980s kids. Mostly because it combined things we loved: celebrities, ghosts, secret powers, and comedy that moved faster than you could keep up with. You watched Jennifer Slept Here and felt like you were in on a weird little secret. It was a show that winked at you through the screen and said, being haunted might not be so bad if the ghost is fabulous. And for that brief year, we all wanted to be the kid with the coolest, quirkiest, most undead best friend in town. It's a Living had a simple premise: 6 waitresses working at a swanky restaurant on top of a Los Angeles skyscraper, juggling tips, tough customers, and each other. It ran for nearly a decade, first on ABC and then in syndication, from 1980 to 1989. But despite its long life, it somehow fell through the cracks of television history. Maybe it was because the cast changed more than once. Maybe it was because people did not know how to market a show that was about working women, but not as flashy as Charlie's Angels or as dramatic as Dynasty. It was funny, it was sharp, and it gave voice to the struggles of service workers in a way few sitcoms ever have. These were not rich characters. They were real. They clocked in tired, left exhausted, and still found reasons to laugh in between. Each joke landed because it came from a place of lived-in truth, not punchline formulas. The show was less about drama and more about dignity. They argued, supported each other, and occasionally broke down in the break room. The comedy came from the grind, the awkward tables, the demanding guests, the tired feet. And while it had plenty of laughs, it never made fun of their lives. It respected them. That quiet dignity is why It's a Living still resonates with the people who remember it. But syndication does strange things to memory. Shows become familiar, but fuzzy, important, but unspecific. It lived in reruns and then disappeared. And now, it is a name people say with a vague sense of recognition, like something they dreamed about once. But behind that name was something brave, something real, something that showed working women without glamour, but with grit. There is something about growing up in the late 80s that made weird feel normal. Case in point, Out of This World. A teen girl named Evie discovers on her 13th birthday that she is half alien. Not the green kind with antennas. Her dad is from a distant planet and she inherited his powers. What powers? Oh, nothing major. Just freezing time with her fingers, talking to a disembodied cube on her nightstand, and learning to control the universe one day at a time. Totally average teen stuff, right? Out of This World lived in that beautiful space between bizarre and wholesome. It looked like your standard family sitcom at first. Single mom, suburban house, best friend who always gets into trouble. But then you would blink and Evie would stop time to avoid doing her homework, or pause the whole world to fix a social disaster at school. And sometimes she would have full conversations with her alien dad through a glowing plastic cube that lit up in rainbow colors and spoke with the voice of Burt Reynolds. Yes, Burt Reynolds. The show never really explained how it all worked. The alien stuff was just accepted. No one asked too many questions. That was the magic of it. It did not need to make sense. It just needed to make you smile. And it did. Every time Evie tried to help someone and made everything worse. Every time her mom reminded her to be more human than alien. Every time the laugh track rolled over a moment that was actually kind of sweet. There were episodes about growing up, friendship, peer pressure, even jealousy, all filtered through the lens of a girl who could literally stop the world. But somehow, It never felt preachy. It felt light, relatable, even when it made no sense at all. Because Evie was not perfect. She was awkward and kind and trying her best. And if you were a kid watching, you felt like maybe you had powers too, just different ones. It ran for 4 seasons, quietly carving out its place in television history. And even if people do not bring it up much today, the ones who watched it remember. They remember the finger-point freeze, the cube's glowing voice, the way it made growing up feel a little more magical. Out of This World was sci-fi wrapped in comfort, and that is exactly why it is too good to forget. The New Adventures of Bean Baxter might be the most 80s thing that ever aired on television. Just say the name out loud. It already sounds like a kid who skateboards on top of the White House. And the show lived up to it. It was about a totally normal teenager whose dad gets kidnapped by an evil organization, so the government secretly recruits him to be a spy. You heard that right. One day, he is doing homework. The next day, he is saving America in his Letterman jacket. And the best part? He is actually kind of good at it. Beans, yes, that was his real name, had everything an undercover agent needed. He was athletic, clever, curious, and had just enough awkward teenage charm to blend into high school and enemy bases. The show was like someone took a Saturday morning cartoon and forced it to wear jeans and drive a convertible. Every episode had secret missions, explosions, absurd disguises, and gadgets that looked like they were made out of calculators and Hot Wheels. The plots made almost no sense, and that was the fun of it. It felt like someone gave a spy agency to the kid from algebra class who never tied his shoes. There was action, sure, but half the tension came from wondering if Beans would make it home before curfew. You would go from science fairs to villain hideouts in a single scene. Beans would get into fistfights in the lunchroom and then use a laser pen to escape a maximum security facility. One time he snuck into a secret lab hidden under a shopping mall. Another time he flew a jetpack through a cornfield. But here is what made it stick with 1980s kids. The show did not make him a superhero. Beans was nervous, confused, and constantly getting in over his head. He still had crushes. He still had curfews. He still got grounded. His mom did not even know he was working for the government. She just thought he was going through a phase. Meanwhile, he is out there dodging laser traps and fighting grown men in turtlenecks. The contrast between suburban life and spy drama was so wild that it started to make sense in its own bizarre way. And the villains? They were cartoonishly over the top. And in a way, we were. Every kid who watched it felt like maybe, just maybe, they had what it took to save the world, as long as they made it home before dinner. The New Adventures of Beans Baxter was short-lived, but it gave every kid permission to dream big, act bold, and maybe sneak a walkie-talkie into their backpack, just in case. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes, That was exactly what made it so rich. Which of these forgotten spin-offs made you do a double take? Drop your favorite in the comments, tap like if you remembered one too late, and subscribe so the weird side of television never slips past you again.